Hello, and welcome to my video message for Sunday, September the 13th. I want to talk today about teamwork. I read again recently the 16th and very last chapter of the book of Romans. Romans is a letter, an epistle written by Paul to a church he did not start, neither had he ever visited with them. And in that 16th chapter, there are almost 30 names of people, acquaintances and ministry partners of the apostle. Quite a few of those, like Aquila and Priscilla, were great contributors to the work of the gospel, especially in Asia and later in Europe, partners with Paul. In the letter to the Colossians, Paul mentions the names of 8 fellow laborers with him, partners in ministry. Like each of us, Paul needed help. Anointed of the Spirit and assisted by those who joined him in the risky work of preaching the gospel, Paul was able to accomplish great and powerful things because of unstoppable teamwork. I'm reminded of a story. Once there was a man who was lost while driving through the country. As he tried to read a road map while driving, this was obviously before the days of GPS, he accidentally drove off the road into a deep, muddy ditch. And although not injured, his car was stuck. So the man walked to a nearby farmhouse looking for help. There he found an old farmer and asked him for help. The farmer replied, "Warwick can get you out of that ditch," pointing to an old mule standing out in the field. The man looked at the old run-down mule and then looked at the farmer, who just stood there and kept repeating, "Yep, old Warwick can do the job." The man figured he had nothing to lose, so the 2 men and Warwick made their way back to the ditch and his stuck car. The farmer hitched the mule to the car. With a snap of the reins, he shouted, "Pull, Fred! Pull, Jack! Pull, Ted! Pull, Warwick!" And the mule pulled the car from the ditch with very little effort. The man was amazed. He thanked the farmer, patted the mule, and asked, "Why did you call out all of those other names before you called on Warwick?" The farmer grinned and said, "Well, old Warwick is just about blind. As long as he believes he is part of a team, he doesn't mind pulling." Kind of like some of us, I think. The Apostle Paul was not a lone ranger. He was part of a real team. One of my favorite Old Testament stories is the unlikely friendship between David, who would eventually replace Saul as king in Israel, and Jonathan, Saul's son and the natural heir of the king. When Jonathan's father sought to kill David, it was Jonathan who stood by David and assisted in his escape from Saul. On one occasion, when David was running from Saul and in fear for his life, it was Jonathan who encouraged David. I love the words of 1 Samuel 23 and 16, which says, "Then Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David in the woods and strengthened his hand in God." David may not have survived without the help he received from Jonathan. That teamwork was blessed of God. Today, our world faces one of the deadliest challenges we have seen since the days of World War II. The eventual carnage of death, sickness, and economic disruption from this virus could very well be beyond our capability to stop. We need, I think, a renewed partnership including the best of human efforts and cooperation, along with a partnership of prayer which calls on Almighty God. For without his help, we are blindly wrestling with a deadly opponent. In the Old Testament, the Lord instructed the people of Israel, when faced with a crisis, if there was a disease or a pestilence, they should turn their faces toward the temple in Jerusalem and cry out to God. He promised to hear those prayers of desperation directed toward his house. It would be a partnership of prayer when God's people all together called on him. I wonder in this crisis if we have yet recognized that this is a desperate time. Are we yet aware it is time for a partnership of prayer? There are limits to the work of science. We are obviously aware right now of the limitations of political leadership during a crisis. And certainly masks and social distancing are not enough. There is only one unlimited dimension, and that is the dimension of prayer. Matthew chapter 19, Jesus declared, "With God, all things are possible." In Matthew chapter 18, he instructed us, "If two of you shall agree on earth as touching anything that they shall ask, it shall be done for them of my Father which is in heaven." For almost a full year now, this pandemic has raged, and frankly, no end is yet in sight. The challenge is strong enough, I think, it should be strong enough, to drive us to our knees. Are we about ready to form a partnership of prayer, agreeing that God alone is able to heal our diseased world? The promises of God are still valid today if God's people can just agree and have a partnership of prayer. Joel chapter 2, verse 32 says, "And it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be delivered." Yes, I think it's time that we form a partnership of prayer. This is a serious issue we are facing. It's a deadly issue, but it's something that God in heaven knows about, and I believe he's waiting on his people to get together and call upon his name. I challenge you today, let's form a partnership of prayer. I remind you that for one more week, we are not having public worship services, but we invite you next Sunday, September the 20th, to join us as we'll once again come together in the house of the Lord. Until then, I continue to pray God's blessings for you and your family. And I ask you again, please be safe. May God bless you today.